The Hawthorne Manor was built of white stone and expectation, rising 3 stories high with a fourth secret story dedicated entirely to wealth. My father, a man whose sole religion was financial ascent, had secured every last ounce of prestige, making us the dominant family of commerce in the region. Yet, in the hierarchy of beauty and affection, I was perpetually bankrupt. My name is Alara. I was the eldest daughter, but you wouldn't know it. I have always been a study in muted colors. My hair is the dreary brown of wet autumn leaves, my eyes a common hazel, and my frame, slight and anxious, felt permanently bent as if trying to fold itself into invisibility. Opposite me stood Diana, my sister, who was sunlight made flesh. Her hair was spun gold, her eyes sapphire, and her features so perfectly symmetrical they looked drawn by a master architect. Diana was the key to more wealth. I was simply an expensive error. On this particular Tuesday, the pressure in the house was a thick, sweet perfume of anticipation and dread. The Sterlings were due. A family exponentially richer than ours, possessing influence my father only dreamed of. Their vast holdings were old world, transcendent wealth. Ours was merely new world success. Their son, Julian, was the prize, and Diana was the bait. My mother, Beatrice, found me polishing a vase in a hallway, performing one of the small, futile tasks she assigned me to keep me busy and out of sight. "Ilara," she said, her voice dropping to that dangerous, silken whisper reserved for serious disappointments. She didn't look at me, but adjusted the cuff of her emerald dress. "The Sterlings will arrive at 3. You will remain in your room. Lock the door. We don't need any distractions today. Diana needs to be the sole focus." I felt the familiar dull thud in my chest. "Yes, Mother," I murmured, my gaze fixed on the reflection of the marble floor. My face, distorted in the polished silver, confirmed her assessment: liability. My room was in the northwest wing, a perfectly adequate space but far from the elaborate south wing Diana occupied. It was my exile, where the sun faded first and the sounds of the main house were muffled by thick walls. I retreated there an hour before the expected arrival, moving like a ghost through the silent corridors. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the closed door. I could feel the energy surging below, the final polish of the glasses, the deep, rumbling laughter of my father practicing his charming facade, Diana's clear, tinkling voice rehearsing her anecdotes. At exactly 3 o'clock, the sound came. The massive, iron-studded front door opening, followed by a deeper set of voices. The Sterlings were here. The drawing room was directly below my second-story window, but I could only hear snippets through the heavy construction. I recognized the deep baritone of Mr. Sterling, the sharp, intelligent commentary of Mrs. Sterling. And then, a voice I didn't know, Julian. It was level, polite, and reserved. He sounded like a man who knew his worth, but perhaps cared very little for showing it off. The confinement grew unbearable. It was as if the shame of my existence were a physical pressure in the room. I needed release. I reached for the battered wooden lute hidden under my bed. I knew Diana laughed at my old-fashioned tastes and my preference for mournful, simple songs over the fashionable, giddy music of the courts. But singing was my only untarnished space. My voice was something my parents had never cared enough to scrutinize or criticize. I began to sing a song called The Wren's Lament. It was a melody about a small plain bird that watched the glittering eagles fly, wishing only for a single warm branch on which to rest its weary head. My voice was quiet, kept low to stay trapped within my own 4 walls, but it was clear. I closed my eyes, letting the sorrow of the lyrics, which felt entirely my own, pour out. For 5 glorious minutes, I was not Alara the Invisible. I was simply a sound, a feeling, pure and unburdened. I stopped abruptly when I heard a faint sound, a floorboard creaking in the hall outside my room. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs, convinced it was Mother, coming to scold me for daring to make noise. I snatched the lute and thrust it back under the bed. The sound didn't come again. I sank back onto the mattress, waiting for the inevitable reprimand, but the house remained silent, the polite drone of conversation continuing downstairs. I didn't know it then, but the sound was Julian Sterling, who, having excused himself for a moment of air and privacy, had been drawn away from the drawing room's gilded lies by the simple truth of my song. The waiting was agonizing. I imagined Diana dazzling them, securing the engagement, and setting our family on its inevitable trajectory toward greater, more glorious affluence. I felt a weird mix of relief. My duty was done simply by staying hidden, and a familiar, piercing loneliness. Then a sudden, sharp cessation of sound from below. Silence. A terrifying, heavy vacuum. A moment later, the silence was ripped apart by a furious, high-pitched whisper from below, carrying just faintly through the floorboards. "Julian, what in God's name are you saying?" It was Mr. Sterling, the great patriarch, and he sounded terrifyingly enraged. A new, stronger voice cut through the air. It was Julian's. It was no longer polite. It was cold, clear, and utterly demanding. My mother's voice, strained and panicked, followed. "The contract, Julian. You must consider the contracts." And then my own name, slicing through the tension like a broken glass shard. Julian's voice. "I am aware of your family dynamics, Mr. Hawthorne, and I have made my choice. I require the hand of the singer, Alara. Alara, the singer." My blood ran cold, then hot, a wave of nauseous disbelief washing over me. They knew I existed. They were speaking my name in the context of the grand, dangerous drama of wealth and marriage. My father's bellow followed, echoing up the stairwell with brutal force. "Alara, come down here immediately. Do you hear me? Now!" I scrambled off the bed, my legs trembling so violently I nearly fell. "Unwell, unwell. Tell them you are unwell," my mind screamed, repeating Mother's usual excuse. But Father's voice was an absolute command. Disobedience now meant utter ruin. I pushed my door open. The hallway seemed endless. Every step I took on the polished wood was loud. Thump, 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 sounding like the beat of my own frantic heart. I smoothed my simple drab gray dress, knowing the effort was useless. It was the dress of a scullery maid, not a bride. I reached the drawing room doorway. I did not enter fully. I simply stood on the threshold, a small, trembling silhouette against the dim light of the back hall. The air in the room was thick enough to choke on. The 6 people inside were frozen in a tableau of shock and fury, every face a masterpiece of negative emotion. My mother, Beatrice, was gripping the back of a chaise lounge so hard her knuckles were white, her eyes wide, darting between Julian and me with utter terror. Her beautiful, controlled mask had dissolved, leaving behind a woman terrified of losing her fortune. The meticulous curls framing her face seemed to sag with defeat. My father's face was a mottled shade of puce, the veins standing out on his neck like thick, purple cords. His mouth was open in a silent snarl of command and disbelief, his jaw trembling with suppressed violence. Diana. Diana was the worst. She was positioned next to Julian, but her entire body was rigid, coiled away from him. Her lips were pulled back in a silent, venomous hiss, and her sapphire eyes, usually so lovely, were full of pure, unfiltered hatred directed entirely at me. I was the stain on her perfect canvas. The tremor in her chin was the only sign that her spectacular performance had just been brutally canceled. And Julian Sterling. He was the only one who moved. He was tall, elegantly dressed, and possessed a quiet authority that seemed to dwarf my imposing father. He pushed away from the fireplace mantel he'd been leaning against and walked slowly across the polished marble floor. He walked straight past Diana, who let out a tiny, choked sound of fury as he ignored her. He stopped several feet in front of me, allowing me to take in the detail of his face. It was handsome, yes, but more importantly, it was alive. His eyes, a startling, clear green, were focused, intense, and utterly without malice. He looked at me, Alara the Invisible, and I felt as if a strong, bright beam of sunlight had finally caught the dusty corner of my soul. Julian did not speak to my parents. He didn't address Diana's palpable rage. His world had narrowed to just the 2 of us. He performed a slight, deep bow, a gesture I knew was reserved for royalty, not a liability in a woolen dress. "Alara," he said. My name, spoken by him, sounded foreign and beautiful, like a rare crystal chime. "Your parents sought a partner for me. I believe I have found her." My hands felt cold. I could only stare, speechless, waiting for the punchline, the cruel joke I felt certain was coming. Diana finally broke the silence, her voice tight with venom, laced with the shrill edge of true panic. Sir, you insult your family. Look at her. She's timid, common, she has no presence. She has spent her life hidden. She is the one everyone knows to ignore. Julian turned his head slightly, giving Diana a look of cold, surgical assessment that silenced her instantly. It was a look that dismissed her not for her vanity, but for her sheer lack of substance. He turned back to me, the gentleness returning to his eyes. He ignored the storm raging behind him. I overheard you, Alara, he continued, his voice dropping to a low melodic register meant only for me. I heard you singing the Wren's Lament. It is a song of heartbreaking truth, and your voice carried every note without artifice. It was the only honest sound in this entire house today. He extended his hand, palm up, toward me. My heart was not just beating now. It was a frantic, trapped bird trying to escape my ribs. I don't care for the contracts they seek, the gold they demand, or the beauty they parade, he stated, his green eyes locking onto my frightened hazel ones. I want the girl who sings. I choose the voice of truth. I choose you. His words were an earthquake. They didn't just rattle the room. They shattered the foundation of my life's most basic ingrained belief, that I was worthless. I looked at his outstretched hand, then back at the scene of silent, horrified fury behind him. My entire family's future, my entire identity as the ugly sister, hung suspended in the vast, terrifying space between my hand and his. I saw Diana's face, now contorted in a look of absolute murderous envy. The air smelled of marble, perfume, and the scorched ruin of my parents' plans. I finally raised my hand, slow and shaking, terrified of the risk, terrified of the light, but utterly compelled by the recognition I had never received before. My fingers brushed his. His grip was warm, strong, and immediate. The moment he closed his hand around mine, my life as Alara the Shadow ended. The silence that followed was not merely the absence of sound, it was the suffocating cessation of breath in the room. The Sterlings, Julian's parents, were the first to react. Mr. Sterling, a man whose face was usually an impenetrable fortress, looked ready to explode. His wife, however, let out a slow, controlled intake of breath, her eyes, as sharp and discerning as her son's, now fixed on me, analyzing. Julian Sterling, his father roared, slapping his leather-gloved hand on the mahogany table. The sound cracked through the room like a whip. You do not abandon a financial agreement of this magnitude for a flight of fancy, for some girl you overheard singing. You will apologize and continue the discussion with Miss Diana. Julian did not flinch. He did not let go of my hand. He held my gaze, offering me silent reassurance before turning his attention to the true powers in the room. Father, Julian said, his voice quiet but carrying the absolute weight of command. I am marrying for a partnership, not a merger. You taught me that authenticity is the greatest form of wealth. The moment I entered this house, I sensed the calculation. Diana is beautiful, yes, but she is a calculated asset. Alara is a human being. The contract will be signed, Father, but only with my choice of bride. The shock on my father, Mr. Hawthorne's face was transforming into a desperate scramble for control. The gold-leafed future was dangling by a thread, and my father would sacrifice anything, even his favored daughter, to catch it. Of course, Mr. Sterling, my father blustered, pushing past my mother. He ignored Diana completely, as if she were a fallen chair. He forced a smile, a horrifying, trembling stretch of muscle. Alara is a brilliant, soulful girl, very sensitive. She has always been our poetic one. We simply kept her hidden from the world for her, delicate nature. The sheer, staggering hypocrisy of the statement made me want to wither into the floorboards. I felt a wave of dizziness. Delicate nature, Diana shrieked. She looked like a goddess whose temple had been defiled. Her composure was entirely gone. She surged forward, her hand raised, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. She's ugly, Father. She spent her life in the shadows. She's never spoken a word to anyone who matters. She is not marriage material. Diana's voice was sharp with tears, her perfect features ruined by rage. The beautiful mask had cracked, revealing the frantic, competitive soul underneath. My mother, Beatrice, finally found her voice, though it was a desperate, thin sound. Julian, dear, look at Diana. She is polished. She is known. Alara has no social connections, no education and manners, no wardrobe suitable for your rank. She is a blank slate, a risk. Julian turned his body slightly, positioning himself fully between me and the hostile energy of my family. His shadow fell over me, a physical shield. A risk is far more interesting than a certainty, Julian stated, his gaze meeting Beatrice's panicked one. A blank slate is preferable to a forged signature. She has truth, which is more valuable than your entire wardrobe, Mrs. Hawthorne. He then looked at Mr. Sterling, his own father, and the unspoken negotiation passed between them. It was a transfer of authority, a quiet understanding of power. Mr. Sterling, defeated but seeing the iron will in his son's posture, finally sighed, a deep, grating sound of financial exasperation. Very well, Julian, Mr. Sterling conceded, rubbing his temples. The Hawthorne contract holds. But if this girl causes a scandal, if she proves to be unsuitable, the blame and the financial cost will be entirely yours. Now, take your intended bride and let us conclude this farcical visit. Julian did not hesitate. He looked down at me, a tiny, genuine smile touching the corner of his mouth. Alara, he murmured, his voice softening once more. Do you trust me? I looked at his face, then at the ruins of the life I had just destroyed. My father's fury, my mother's despair, Diana's consuming hatred. I had nothing left to lose but the shame I had carried for 20 years. Yes, I whispered, the single syllable dry and cracking in my throat. He turned, still holding my hand, and began to walk. The simple act of moving forward, out of the dark threshold and into the gilded room as the focus of attention, felt like walking through fire. I kept my head down, relying entirely on the unwavering, warm presence of his hand guiding me out of my gilded cage. We moved past the paralyzed figures in the drawing room. As we passed my father, he let out a low, guttural noise, a mix of professional relief and personal betrayal that was unsettlingly human. My mother simply stared, her mouth slightly ajar, her meticulous composure shattered into a million pieces. The most terrifying moment was passing Diana. She was leaning against the cold marble mantelpiece, her chest heaving, her beautiful face a horrifying mask of crimson and white. As Julian and I walked by, she didn't look at Julian. She looked only at me. Her sapphire eyes, blazing with an awful, consuming light, held a promise of eternal venomous vengeance. I shivered, instinctively pulling closer to Julian's side. Julian, seemingly oblivious to the storm we left behind, addressed his mother, Mrs. Sterling, with quiet politeness. Mother, Alara and I will take the carriage ahead. You and Father can finalize the details. Mrs. Sterling, a woman who seemed to miss nothing, offered me a small measuring look that was far less hostile than my family's, but no less intense. She gave a curt nod. Go then, Julian. You certainly have a great deal of explaining to do. And then, we were outside. The cool, late afternoon air of the world hit me like a physical blow. I blinked against the unfamiliar openness, the sky above my head vast and empty. A large, black, utterly silent motorcar waited for us at the base of the steps. The chauffeur, a man with the stoic face of a seasoned retainer, opened the door without a word. Julian waited until I was settled in the rich, deep leather of the seat before sliding in beside me. The door closed with a satisfying, heavy thunk, sealing us away from the house, the noise, and the fury. I sat ramrod straight, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, suddenly realizing the extent of my vulnerability. I was now alone with a man I knew only by his decisiveness and his ability to hear a sad song through 2 floors of marble. He was my rescuer, but he was also Julian Sterling of the exponential Sterlings. The car began to move, gliding silently away from the Hawthorne Manor. I watched the great White House, my prison, shrink rapidly in the rear window, my vision blurring with sudden, exhausted tears. Julian reached over, not to take my hand this time, but simply to adjust the plush velvet lap rug draped over my knees. The simple, non-demanding gesture surprised me. Are you cold, Alara? He asked. His voice was no longer the commanding tone he used with the men in the drawing room, but quiet, even gentle. I shook my head silently, unable to speak. The fear was ebbing, replaced by a profound, terrifying lightness. the dizzying feeling of standing on the edge of a great precipice. You don't have to talk, Julian said, sensing my inability. He settled back against the leather. But you should know why I chose you, beyond the song. He turned his head to look at me, and his green eyes were surprisingly transparent. I came here expecting to acquire a flawless work of art. Diana is flawless, but a flawless thing cannot be edited, cannot be added to, cannot be partnered with. It is just display. When I heard your voice, it was imperfect, raw, and completely honest. And when I saw you, standing in that doorway, terrified in that simple, unfashionable dress, I saw a soul trying desperately to hide while the rest of the world fought to be seen. He paused, letting the silence fill the space between us, broken only by the hum of the engine. I don't need a golden trophy, Alara. I need an equal who understands the cost of being real in a world obsessed with surfaces. I need someone who sings about the wren, not the eagle. I know I am a stranger, but know this. You are safe. Your parents' opinions, Diana's contempt, your own fear of inadequacy, none of those things can follow you into this car. I finally found my voice, a tiny fractured whisper. Why me? You could have anyone. Julian looked out the window for a moment as the car merged onto the main road, heading toward the heart of the city and then back at me. A deep, quiet sadness shadowed his face. I understand loneliness, Alara, he admitted. And in your song, I heard a soul that was just as desperate for escape as I was. The long, silent drive concluded at the Sterling home. The observatory, a place of ancient stone and quiet influence. Julian led me directly through a vast foyer lined with towering, leather-bound books, the air smelling of cedar and knowledge. This was a refuge. We sat by the fire, the shadows of the flames dancing on the high, carved ceiling. The world will call this a scandal, Julian began, his voice calm. My father is placated by the contract, but society will tear at you. They will try to mold you into something predictable. He reached into his pocket and placed something small and heavy into my palm. A single, smooth piece of petrified wood, striped with the dark rings of centuries. You were not chosen to follow their rules. You were chosen to ignore them. I need you to be ruthlessly, unapologetically yourself. This wood has endured immense pressure, yet it remains solid and truthful. I gripped the wood, its coolness a perfect anchor. Julian, I whispered, I don't know if I'm ready for the scrutiny. What if I fail your expectations? He took my hand, not as a possessor, but as a partner. I have no expectations for the wife they wanted, Alara, only for the soul that sings. The world is full of golden certainty. I chose the beautiful, necessary risk of truth. You are not meant for my world. You are meant to change it. 4 years have passed since the night I left the Hawthorne Manor. 4 years since I took Julian Sterling's hand and walked into a destiny that was entirely my own making. I sit now in the quiet comfort of the observatory's conservatory, the morning sun warming the dark, ancient stone walls. Julian and I married 6 months after that furious engagement, an affair of quiet joy that focused on commitment, not commerce. The pages you have just read are my autobiography, completed. I wrote it for my small daughter, Celeste, who has my quiet, hazel eyes but Julian's fierce spirit. She is currently asleep against my side, her head heavy on my shoulder. And I am heavy too, expecting our second child. I look down at my belly, already determined that both my children will be raised with one absolute truth. There will be no favorite, and no shadow. They will both be seen. They will be equal. Julian's family, once the terrifying arbiters of true wealth, embraced me. They respect the intellect and resilience I learned in the shadows, and they see the deep happiness I brought to Julian. The love here is real, measured in quiet library discussions and shared views of the moon. Not in ball gowns and endless social maneuvering. The Hawthorns, of course, attempt to cling to the periphery. My father sends calculating, flowery letters, and my mother tries to arrange discreet, casual meetings, forever trying to leverage the Sterling name. We maintain a distance that is polite but absolute, a final severing of their false influence, and Diana? She got her wealthy match, marrying a highly successful financier. He is rich, certainly, but his fortune only brushes the edges of the Sterling dynasty. It did not secure the transcendence she craved. She remains glittering, beautiful and desperately unhappy. Her contempt for me is now a quiet ache in the background of her life, the bitter certainty that I, the unseen girl, stole the only thing she truly desired, the power of authenticity. She despises me still, but her hatred is nothing more than the final broken chime of a cage door long since opened. I close the manuscript now, placing the piece of petrified wood, Julian's gift, on the final page. I am not the invisible girl anymore. I am Alara Sterling, wife, mother, and author of my own life. The wren found its branch, and in this house of truth, she sings louder than ever.